most authors I talk to have this kind of really beautiful romantic story with writing where they're like, I've always loved it. And you know, writing and I have been best friends since I was a little kid. And I love reading. And, so finally I just got the courage to like start working it out and, I'm working on, but that's not me. I hated writing. It was the worst. I hated it so much and found myself in a position where the only thing I had left that I could do was write.
You are now listening to the highlight reel builder for authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, certified self-leadership trainer and author of the best-selling book, Stay the Course, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be getting some goodies today from the guest that's up next. And today on the highlight reel builder for authors known as the Going North podcast, we got one heck of a super special, awesome human for you today, my friends, all the way from the great city of charm, crime, and crab cakes, a fellow Baltimorean baby, a father, a multi-time award-winning author, editor. My man basically does it all. Husband, father of 5 kids. Like, my man is a Renaissance man walking, baby. Been on all sorts of wonderful podcasts, and he's now gracing this one with his presence for the first time, which is probably not going to be the last time either. So let's give it up for the wonderful J.E. himself, the man of joy and excellence, Mr. Jeff Elkins. How you doing today, Jeff?
Dom, that was like the greatest intro ever. I'm gonna like snag that audio clip, and I'm just gonna like play it whenever I walk into a room. Just gonna like old style boombox it like the '90s,
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I'm super excited to be here. I've been listening to you for a couple months now, and you're such a great interviewer. I'm really pumped to just get a chance to hang out and chat. And I also charm, crime, and crab cakes. That's a fantastic description of our city, man. That's really great. I mean, I know you've seen them. I used to love to find Baltimore, for those who don't live in Baltimore like you and I do, they used to have that Baltimore always just had this like slogan problem where like it can't quite decide what it wants to call itself. So for a while there, like every mayor had a new slogan, like we were the city that reads for a while. And then one of my favorite Baltimore podcasts turned it into the city that breeds, which I don't think was what that mayor intended. And then we were, but my favorite was then we were the Believe City for a while. The mayor had those black and white Believe signs everywhere. But then after that, he decided that we were the greatest city in America.
Oh, yeah, I remember that time, yeah. Yeah, I remember that one especially, yeah.
He put all those benches up all over town. He had these like, brother, there's still several of them around because I like see them when I go walking and stuff. But they've got like the white sides to them and then like the brown slats. And the brown slats had white letters on them that said the greatest city in America. And when I used to work downtown as a pastor, and I do a bunch of homeless guys that I worked with all the time that thought it was really fun and ironic to take naps on those benches. Because when they laid down, the way the words were, it would be right over top of their body. And I was like, oh, you're the worst. Yeah. And I always felt bad. I was like, man, some marketing guy. But then they moved from that one to what I think is the worst slogan for a city of all time, which was "Get in on it." Do you remember that one? It only lasted a couple months, and it was all these posters. They took down all the black and white Believe posters that I think like this city really resonated with and everybody loved, and they put up these like fluorescent colored posters everywhere downtown that said "Get in on it." I was like, "Get in on what? What are you guys talking about?" Yeah, it's terrible. Sorry, these are Baltimore. This is what happens when you get 2 Baltimore people on a show. We talk about our city. Nobody else can talk about it though. If anybody else talks about it, we're gonna fight. But you and I can talk about it all day.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
actually
man.
kind of funny how that works.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If you get some Baltimore people in the room, we'll talk about all the problems. But you get somebody from Philly down here, and they start talking problems about Baltimore, and they can just go back home. They don't.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
can,
Yeah.
they can't say anything at all.
It's like you already claimed cheesesteaks. Like, go back.
Yeah, that's right.
The Eagles finally won a Super Bowl. We get it. We still got two.
That's right. And theirs doesn't count. I don't know why it doesn't count, but I just feel like it doesn't count.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll give them credit. They had Torrey Smith on their team that year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. If you can't win with that. Yeah, of course we've had some great players too, and we've had some terrible years. So you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
not talk about Baltimore sports. We're gonna get really sad. So,
Yeah. Well. With the Ravens, it's not always sad. That's the good
not
news.
always. It's
not,
true.
not always.
That's right. And the O's, a couple of days before we're recording this, the O's did have a no hitter, which was a nice surprise. Of course, Dan Roderick, the Baltimore Sun columnist, immediately wrote a column that was like, "Hey, don't get optimistic. Don't get happy about this. We got a no hitter. It doesn't mean anything." Oh, that hurts.
It does because he's kind of right. That's the sad part. Is like,
Right.
damn it.
You just want to look at him and be like, "Can't you just give us like 2 days, man? Can't you just like give us like 2 days to be happy before you like bring us back to reality?" Our sad baseball team. Yeah. Anyway,
But hey,
it's fun. Yeah. So all that to say, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be on to talk to another Baltimore on a writing podcast. It's awesome.
heck yeah, man. And what I love about your writing journey is that it really started from a place of you being challenged to write about something. Because if I'm not mistaken, it was like you in a board meeting or something, and you just had so much to say, and they're like, maybe you should write all this down, buddy, and give it to us in like a paper.
Yeah, man. So yeah, writing for me has been a weird journey. I grew up dyslexic, right? Like hated English was the one subject in school that I hated more than anything else. And I actually grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, went to high school in New Orleans, Louisiana, elementary school in Michigan. My family bounced around a lot, but high school was in New Orleans. So I claim it as like where I grew up. And I loved my high school, but English wasn't our best subject. Definitely not my best subject. And so I went to college, and my first year of college totally failed freshman English. Like I knew zero grammar, and I was like, it doesn't matter to me because I hate this, and I'm never going to write anything anyway. I was a pre-med bio major, so like I was like, I'm going to med school. I'm never going to be a writer. Ended up going into the ministry instead and working as a pastor, and that's part of what brought me to Baltimore City, was working at a church in downtown Baltimore. Left that church, went to another church, and I was in this meeting with all of these old guys. And I had blogged a bunch just as like, because that's what you were supposed to do as a pastor. And I was like experimenting with some stuff in church world. So I was like, okay, I'm going to treat this like a scientific experiment. I'm going to blog my results. Like that's how we used to do in science. When you did an experiment, you had to keep a lab journal. So I was like, I'm going to do the same thing. So I had blogged some, and then I was in this meeting with a bunch of these old guys, and they were like, I was ranting about something I shouldn't have been talking about in the meeting, just ranting. And one of them was like, Jeff, this is all so interesting, which it was not. And he was like, can you write this down for us? We're not going to talk about it in the meeting anymore, but we still want to hear it. So why don't you write it down and then just email it to us? And I was like, I will write it down, not realizing at the time that like he just wanted to go home. So I took the next day and I wrote for like 6 hours. And I started off the essay with this like big fictional illustration to like describe what I wanted to talk about. And I had so much fun writing that fictional illustration. I was like, man, this is fun. And that job got really stressful. I was helping a church that was struggling. I was working with it to help it either figure out if it was going to change and become something new or close. That's
Mm.
why they hired me, was to figure that out. And so, you know, change is a difficult conversation for everybody. And so and as the guy serving as the change agent, I was kind of the one that was the target for most of the anxiety that change, which is a beautiful and very painful role to play. So I knew I was playing it when I came in, which was good. But yeah, so anyway, I started looking for stress relief, and I kept coming back to like, man, I had a great time writing that short story. So I took a short story course online with a site called The Right Practice, and learned from a guy named Joe Bunting how to write a short story. He's got a little short book you can find on Amazon called How to Write a Short Story. And I just started cranking out one a night, and I did it for a year. Um, Not always one a night, but you know, at least 3 to 4 a week. And I just sit down for like an hour and pound out these short stories. And then I was like, well, I don't have anywhere to put these. And so I was like, I'll just make a literary journal. So I looked to like apply, like, oh, I'm going to take my best one and like submit it to a literary journal. And I started reading, and like they wanted money to submit it. Like they were like, you got to pay for us to read it. And man, I had been working on a pastor's salary for like 10 years. I didn't have any money. I was like, what are you talking about? Pay to submit a short story? I was like, I'm broke. So I was like, well, I can't do that. But I do know that websites are really cheap. So I just put up I was like, I'll just make my own literary journal. So I started one called Short Fiction Break, and I started I just put up to other authors. I was like, hey, you know, if you want to publish a short story, send it to me. I'll put it up. And so after like 3 or 4 months, I had a community of like 20 authors, and we were all writing together. It was really great. And I did that for like a year. And then I got really overwhelming because I was getting a ton of short stories. And I took a job with a nonprofit, and that job did not go well. But I took a job with a nonprofit as their director of programs. And I was so excited about the job, and I loved it. It just wasn't a great fit. But when I took the job, they asked me, they're like, hey, you need to stop publishing and writing, which was a weird request. But they were like, we feel like the fiction is going to reflect poorly on the organization. And I was so excited about the job, I didn't realize that like part of what they were asking me to do was kind of deny part of who I'd become. And so I was like, yeah, okay. I'm pumped about our mission. I'm pumped about the vision of the organization. I'll just put that on hold. I was just doing it for stress relief anyway. It's not a big deal. Well, fast forward 7 months, and they fired me. And
oh wow!
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Wow,
wasn't great. And so, out of spite, I was like, you know what? I'm going to dig up some of those things I was working on, and I published my first book like 3 months later, my first novel, and kind of caught the bug because that when they fired me, I had no job. I had no prospects. And, you know, when you take a job and then get fired quickly like that, it kind of wrecks your resume because there's now this like cloud hanging over you of like, what happened there? Right. Like, and even when you're interviewing with people, they're like, can we trust you to tell us the truth about what happened there? Like something happened there. And so, you know, it was, I couldn't, I knew I was like, I'm not going to be able to get work. And to top it off, my wife at the time was 9 months pregnant with our 5th kid. So they fired me 3 weeks before he was born. And so no job, you know, totally broke because I'd been a pastor for 15 years. I had nothing. And so I was like, I can never be in this position again where my income is dependent on one organization, especially since my whole career I had worked as a change agent. Every church I had worked at, like starting in seminary, when I started working at my first church, you know, it was a college ministry, and we started with like 20 students. And then because of things that happened in the community, we blew up to like 800 in 3 months. Wow. And so that was a massive like change agent job. And then I worked at a church downtown that was going through like a period of evolution. And I was definitely working as a change agent there. Then I helped build a charter school, kind of started my own thing for a while, which was totally about like trying to change how the church worked and what it was. And then I took this job with this other church that was changing. And then I took this job with a nonprofit, and they actually hired me because they knew my reputation as a change agent. So like, it was like, yeah, just recognizing that like, man, you know, if I'm going to keep getting these jobs in places where I'm a change agent, I got to have an income outside of that. And so that's really what led me to writing. That deep desire to build a business and life for myself that had multiple tiers of income, so I never got stuck again working with one organization that could really like damage me and my family, you know. So yeah, weird journey to writing. Like, I know most authors I talk to have this kind of really beautiful romantic story with writing, where they're like, I've always loved it, and you know, writing and I have been best friends since I was a little kid, and I love reading, and you know, so finally I just got the courage to like start working it out, and you know, I'm working on. But that's not me. I hated writing. It was the worst. I hated it so much, and found myself in a position where the only thing I had left that I could do was write. And to top it off, as I started writing those novels, a friend I'd worked with at a church before called me and was like, "Hey, I am the COO of this tech company. We're looking for writers. You're becoming a writer. How would you like to come and write full time for this tech company?" So I've been working for them for the last 7 years too. We simulate difficult conversations, and it's fantastic. So yeah, so I write novels. I run an editing service called the Dialogue Doctor, which you can find at dialoguedoctor.com. And we focus on making your dialogue something that will engage readers. That was my 2-second sales pitch. And I write novels, and all of my novels are based in Baltimore. So that's how I came into writing. Kind of a painful, weird thing, but it's given me a second life outside of my the first life I had as a pastor and working in the ministry. I'm now in my second life, and it's all due to writing. So I don't imagine I'll ever stop now. I'm 10 novels in, 7 years in, 10 novels in, a couple hundred short stories, and still going strong. Working on a novel right now. So yeah, I think I'm hooked now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hook,
You know
line,
it is.
and
You got a
soaring,
couple
baby.
books. What'd you say?
Hook, line, and soaring.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you know, once you get that bug, I'm sure once you finished going north, I'm sure you immediately started thinking of other ideas for the next book.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of how it works.
Oh yeah, it's so darn true. It's like the bug was real. Like yeah, it was some biting from the bug action was definitely happening.
Yeah. You ever think about writing any fiction?
I actually do. Like, I'd say it's like one of those pie in the sky, but kind of not pie in the sky ideas. It's like definitely want to write like one of those teen like fiction novels, like based off.
Nice.
It's probably gonna. There's definitely gonna be themes from Final Fantasy in that one. Definitely.
Awesome. So going like a YA fantasy direction. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You ever I remember as a kid I used to play this video game Gauntlet. Did you ever play that? Where like there's like a wizard and like a guy with an axe and like a mage walking around, and they were always like fighting. It was always like in a dungeon, and they're always like fighting different like weird monsters and stuff. And every time I think about writing a YA fantasy, I'm always like, I can just write Gauntlet. I was like, I'll just write that. Just write that video game. Yeah, I'm not that bold. I haven't gone fantasy yet. I'm not that bold. I can't. Well, I kind of went fantasy. My first series takes place in Baltimore, and it is about homeless superheroes that defend the world from otherworldly monsters. But yeah, it's kind of it's an urban fantasy. It's technically it's a supernatural thriller, but takes place in the city and follows Jose and Chris, who are these two superheroes, part of a secret society that are defending the world from monsters. But they're also homeless, so they got to deal with all the issues of being homeless at the same time. Yeah, which is I think puts a little bit more flavor on it, especially if you know Baltimore. Because when I write books, my biggest weakness in writing books is the setting. Like, I love writing characters. I love writing dialogue. Like, love writing action. But describing a setting is really hard for me. So I'm a big walker. Like, I like to just go on long walks, and so all of my settings are real. I used to just find places, and I'd be like, okay, this is where this scene could happen. And so I just like sit there with my journal. I'd write down like, okay, this is what's happening right now. Or I get once I started recording things on my cell phone. So I just like walk with my cell phone. And I'd be like, okay, it's like 20 paces to the corner, and then there's a big tree there, and you can like see the bushes. So especially in that first series, it's the books of the 12 Commandments, Mankin of the Monsters, Mankin and the Lost Boys, and Saving Deborah. And those 4 books, you can literally just walk Baltimore because the locations are just step by step through the city. But yeah, every location's real, which is I think fun. I keep telling myself I'm going to make a Google map or like a walking tour of the books where you can just like walk through all the. But it's one of the nice things about writing homeless characters is they're always outside, so they're just walking around, and they sleep in parking garages. So you can go tour the parking garages of Jose and Chris if you want to.
Oh my goodness. So during those walks when you used to write things down, like did people ever just look at you funny, like, is he a cop or something? Like he's got a book in his hand.
I know, right? No, I never got questioned. It was always a weird. I think I just so don't look like a cop. Yeah. Then I never got asked about it. And Baltimore, the people of Baltimore are really great. Like they're used to weirdos. So you get somebody like me walking around, they're like, yeah, that's just another crazy Baltimore walking around over there with a book, writing crap down, sitting in a. I remember I wrote this one scene in this. I've actually written multiple scenes in this same McDonald's parking lot.
Oh wow.
Because the parking lot I used to, when I was working at a church downtown, we used to have this youth mentor program we built going, and we would pick up these kids from these areas called Sandtown, Winchester, which are like really rough neighborhoods. And right at the corner where we used to pick a bunch of, like right at the corner of like where after we do the round to like pick them all up, we'd always stop to get breakfast, and we'd always stop in this McDonald's. So it became like a prominent feature in a bunch of my books because I was there so often. I was always at the McDonald's, so I knew it really well. But I do remember sitting in the parking lot of that McDonald's with my little journal out, writing about Jose scrounging for dinner in the dumpster. And I do remember people going through the drive-thru and looking at me like, why is that dude looking at that dumpster so hard? What is that crazy person doing? Having that I love affair with that dumpster.
I can picture it now.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a great location because it's, Baltimore has a lot of weird things about it. And one of the weird things it has is this weird highway that like goes nowhere. Do you know what I'm talking about? 40. It just like goes. There's like streets above it, and then it's like this like it seems like it was supposed to like connect downtown to the Beltway, but they just like stopped. They just like quit. Like never mind. And so it literally just like comes to like a solid wall. Like you got to get off or you hit this wall. And the McDonald's was right off the exit there, and so it was kind of like the perfect spot to just like sit. It gets a lot of traffic, but yeah, that's the only time that anybody ever looked at me crazy. There was, and, I deserved it. Yeah, my second series is about a detective named Monetta Watkins who can relive people's memories if she touches them. So they also all take place in real places in Baltimore. And the fun one that I did have an encounter with the cops with when I was there was there's this factory. It used to be an old furniture factory. It's on the west side of town. It's totally abandoned, and it's got like trees growing out of it. And so whenever I'd walk, I always thought it was, one of those buildings that's like super interesting because it's like this big, it's a city block size, and it like clearly used to have a ton of life in it, and there's these trees growing out of it. And I've read all the history about it, like the owner's son was like shot in the parking lot at one point, and that kind of like diminished the owner's like desire to keep the building there was what I read. And So, and it's gutted on the inside, like there's nothing in it. And so the second novel I was writing is about an art theft called Steal. And I was like, man, if I was stealing art in Baltimore, where would I keep it? And I was like, I'd keep it in that abandoned building because like nobody's going in there because it's all
Mm-hmm.
boarded up. But I noticed that like if you look down the alley, there were windows where the boards had been like pulled back and people had gone inside. And so I
Wow.
was like, oh, yeah, that's a good, like, that could be like my villain's headquarters where he's like stealing the art and stashing it. So I was, I was sitting out there just like studying the building and trying to imagine like what it would look like if the villains were sneaking art in there. And I did have some cops pull up on me. And I think they thought I was like looking for a drug deal or something because they were like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm journaling about this building." They're like, "Move along." I was like, "All right." But yeah, yeah. So those nothing crazy setting wise, but you know, definitely some fun encounters. I do highly recommend. Like, I love walking Baltimore. It's we call it the city of neighborhoods. That's you know that, not, but for people listening, because it's just this city of like you know every neighborhood kind of has its own flavor, and
Mm-hmm.
so when I first moved to the city, I made it a point to try and walk every neighborhood because I just wanted to get to know it. I didn't get them all. There's over 300. I didn't get them all done, but I got a lot of them done, and it was a great way to get to know the city. It's just taking 40 minutes during your day and like walking through a neighborhood and listening to people and watching what's going on. Also great to get to know stories and like get stories in your head. It's just watching. I think about it like they talk about Van Gogh, the artist. He used to sit in the town square with his journal and draw and practice. And he
Mm-hmm.
just like, yeah, I saw his journal when I was in Amsterdam at the Van Gogh Museum, and it's just like pages and pages of noses, and then like pages and pages and pages of hands, and like pages and pages and pages of like eyes, and he's just sitting there in the town square watching people pass and drawing their facial features, just practicing like how to do it. And so I kind of thought of my walks in Baltimore as that same kind of thing. You're just kind of walking and learning how to write specific things just by the practice of doing it over and over and over again. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, that's a lot of my books, a lot of the fiction comes out of those walks and out of that experience. And as you're walking, just dreaming about like, what if Moneta was here and this thing happened here, and like, how would she handle that? And then if I can start with that kind of nugget, then I can build out into a scene. But anyway, it's fun writing, man. That's keeps me going.
Oh yeah, it keeps you going indeed. My goodness, man. Because if I'm not mistaken, like you actually had trouble in the beginning with your writing. Like you actually were cranking them out almost like what, like 1 year. I think you did like one book after the other, like for almost a month, few months, something like
Yeah, that was my short story. I was totally cranking out short stories, and I think writing's a weird journey right now. Like because the gatekeepers are down,
that.
right?
Yeah,
Like
man.
you can publish wherever you want. There's no hindrance to publishing. Even a crazy person like me who had zero money, and when I started writing, 5 kids, living in like, well, pretty much homeless, because lost my job. Like so, it was even I can get a book into the world, which is crazy and feels like you're getting away with something. It's like, shouldn't this be harder? It is hard. Writing a novel is hard, but there's so much to learn as you go. And so, like, I put my first several books out there, and I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't understand that when you start publishing, you're actually starting a small business. Like, I didn't
Hmm.
get any of that. I was just like, oh, I'm going to write these books. And when I get my first book out, that people are going to line the streets. We're going to have parades. HBO is going to call me, right? Like HBO is going to call me. David Simon, who produced The Wire, he's going to call me and he's going to be like, "Oh my gosh, I saw on Amazon that you published a book about Baltimore, and it is going to be the next HBO series." Right after Game of Thrones, we're lining this thing up. So I published it and nothing. And so I was like, well, I'll just tell people I know to go read it, and quickly found out that most of my friends are not readers. So I say, hey, will you read my book? And they're like, yeah, I'll read it. And so I was like, well, maybe I just need more of them. Maybe I
Uh,
just need more of them in the world. And so I ignored all genre conventions. I ignored like,
yeah.
yeah, like, whatever that whole thing of like, well, if I was going to bring a product to market that wasn't a book, I'd study the market. I'd see what was selling. I'd figure out like what the customer need was, like where's the demand and how can I supply to the demand. But for some reason, when I started writing, I was like, oh no, this is an art. So supply and demand doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. So I was writing what I thought was urban fantasy because it was in the city and it had monsters in it. So I was like, oh, this is urban fantasy. And so I just start writing the series that I loved. And, I put the stuff into Amazon to make it look like urban fantasy books. Like I used the keywords and stuff.
Mhm.
Still didn't sell. And I was so confused. I had 4 books on the market in a year and a half. And I'm like, why is this selling? And a friend who's also a writer said like, well, you keep telling me these are urban fantasy, but have you looked at what urban fantasy is? I was like, no,
Mm.
it's fantasy in an urban setting. He's like, oh, you need to go look at what urban fantasy is. So he's like, just go to Amazon and just search urban fantasy. So I searched urban fantasy, and sure enough, man, every book had like a 20-something-year-old super hot girl with a glowing hand, and like most of them worked for the FBI. And I was like, what? How is this urban fantasy? And he's like, well, this is what the readers want. Like, this is what they want to read. This is what they're buying. And so, like, you can write these homeless superheroes all you want to, but nobody's in the market asking to read homeless superheroes. So, like, he's like, maybe someday they'll catch on, and then you've got the books ready. Like, when people are ready to read homeless superheroes, you've got them ready. But it's not happening right now. Like right now, people want hot 20-something FBI agents. So I was like, oh man. So yeah. But yeah, it's a lessons learned process, right? Like, so for the next series, I took my time and I was like, all right, what are people reading? What are they enjoying? Like, what am I reading and what am I enjoying? I was like, well, I
Mhm.
really like supernatural stuff, right? Like the TV shows I watch on Netflix, the books I read, if they have like a small supernatural element, I'm all in, right? Like Stranger Things. Yeah, give me more of that. And so I was like, oh, so that's my demand. Like that's the demand kind of line that I want to fill in the market. And so I read a bunch of supernatural thrillers and was like, yeah, this is what I like to read. And so that's why the next series was that. Writing to market is it sounds like this dirty word, like somehow you're like betraying the artist within you. If you're like, I'm gonna write what people want to read. But if you just back up and realize that, like, oh yeah, I'm actually writing this to sustain life, right? Because I
Mhm.
got 5 kids I need to feed, and this is the skill God has given me in order to feed those children, right? Like, so yes, I can be my creative artist self. At some point I also have to turn on my financial brain and be like, hey, what can I write and where can I exercise this creative artist self in a way that is also going to fund my passion so that I can devote more time and energy to it, so that I can be better at it, so that you know I can get better. And I think importantly for me, sustaining the last 7 years, right? Like, because it's been 6 years of writing novels and 10 novels on the market, like 10 finished novels. So, you know, about 2 books a year for me. And in addition to launching this editing business, Dialogue Doctor, and in addition to starting a podcast about writing and like getting all of that stuff out while working a full-time job and having 5 kids. And, for me, it's about, with each book and each experience, making sure that I'm keeping in focus that I'm learning and growing through the process. So people are always asking me, which book is your best book? Like, where do you want to start from? Like, if I'm going to read one of your books, you got 10 books out there, where do I start? And I always tell them, I'm like, well, start with the next one, because the next one's going to be my best one. Start with the next one. The next one will be my best one. So I just continue to tell myself that, right? Like, the next book is the best book. And then once I'm done and it's out in the world, I'm like, well, the next book's the best book, right? Like, how do I make the next one better than the one before? And always trying new stuff, man. Like the book I'm writing right now, I'm actually rewriting the first book I wrote. The first
Oh,
book I wrote was a fictionalized memoir about life as a pastor in Baltimore City.
oh wow.
Um, and really, you know, my personal growth coming as this stupid 20 something kid thinking that I was going to change the world, and then showing up in the world and actually having it change me,
Mm,
and thinking that I was coming to like save people and actually being saved by them. Right. Like, and having that
mm,
experience of like getting into a community and realizing like, oh, the point of this wasn't that I show up and save the community. The point of this was that I needed the community to discover who I actually am. And to discover what like abundant and meaningful life is in that connection with other people. So that was the first book I wrote, and it's terrible. I didn't know how to plot. I didn't know, I didn't know how to structure a scene. I didn't like, the heart is all there. The passion is all there. People read it and they're like, man, you've got something. It's not a book, but it's something. So, I took with COVID, I think we all got a little self-reflective and a little
oh yeah.
like looking back over our past. And I was like, now that I know how to actually plot a book, and now that I know like how to structure a scene, and now that I know like what it means to like take a reader on a journey through a story, I was like, I should try that, attack that thing again. So that's the one I'm writing now. And I'm doing a fun thing. This is what I was going to say, because with every book I'm trying to learn and grow. So I'm doing a fun thing where this one I'm actually writing live.
Oh,
So you can process through me writing it with me.
oh wow.
So I write a chapter a night, and I'm writing it in a Google Doc. So there's a bunch of people reading it with me as I write the first draft. The original book was 30 chapters. I've cut now about 15 of those, just throwing them out. Like, these chapters are really good. And the final version is going to be about 75 chapters. And I'm on chapter 8. Yeah, it's a monster. It's a monster book, but it's worth it. It's a good journey. It's a good journey. So, but I invited readers like, hey, if you want to go on the journey of like authoring this thing with me, you can read it and comment on it as I write it. So if you want to see more of something, readers will pop in and drop a comment of like, oh, I hope there's more of this character. I want to see more of this character. And I'll write them back and I'll be like, well, there wasn't going to be, but there will be now. Right. Like, so if you want to see more, we'll put more in. But yeah, so it's fun. If you go over to my website, jeffelkinswriter.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, and that's where you get the link to like, watch me live write this book and comment and be part of the experience of putting a novel together. And part of the reason I'm doing it too is because, like you say with this podcast, you want to give people an opportunity to get that like moment where things actually take off, that this is like a service for you. Part of writing this book for me is a service for me too, because it's about me processing my deconstruction of institutionalized religion. And for me, just kind of like taking a step back when I was in my 20s to be like, what is this thing that I've been a part of my whole life?
Hmm.
So for me, the book is part of processing that. And I know, with politics in the United States and things that have happened and how divided we are, I think a lot of us are doing that. So this
Yeah.
is live writing this book is just a way of me taking people on the same journey that I went on, of like, hey, let's have a conversation about this thing that is a massive part of our life. And that like, for, if you're like me, I started attending church when I was like 2 weeks old, right? Like my
Yep.
parents, like, I used to joke that I was a church rat, that like, if you turned on the lights, you were going to catch me in like the middle of the room. Like, oh, there's Jeff. Cause I was in church so much as a kid and so much in high school. Like I never left church. And so like going into college, moving from pre-med to seminary, um,
Mm.
was
Wow.
like, this is just how, like, of course that's what I did. Of course that was my life, because my whole life had been church. So then getting to this place where I was in the city and watching the institution I was a part of failed the people we were supposed to serve, um, really forced me to question, like, what is it that we're doing here? What is this thing that we devote so much of our life and time to do? So all that to say, I'm currently live writing my first novel, trying something new. It's going well at the moment. There's a bunch of writers, a bunch of readers taking the journey with me, and I'm hoping that it helps some people process their own journeys as well. But yeah, just think through who they are and what's going on. But anyway, that's my writing saga. That's my high production crank out novels and learn as I go, trying to make each one better than the last journey.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. My goodness, those who are still with us in this wonderful podcast interview journey right now, there are so many darn jewels you can get out of this one. You better listen to this one twice, my friends. Because my man is dropping heat, baby. I'm telling you, it's hotter than fish grease, baby. I'm telling you.
That's terrifying. Listen twice. I'm glad you could pull some jewels out of that weird stream of consciousness I just let loose. That's great. That's why Dom has done over 400 interviews, because he's such a great interviewer. He can get jewels out of swine. That's
Come on, man, you're better than Swan now. Come on
now. Thanks. Hey, swine makes bacon. Good things come from swine. Yeah, man.
Oh man.
Yeah. So the other thing I do is I coach writers in dialogue. That's the other side of my writing life, and that really comes from, I lost my job, and I had this friend call me. And was like, "Hey, do you want to work for this tech company that simulates realistic conversation or difficult conversations?" And that's been a really fantastic journey, because my job for that company for 7 years has been to get in a room with experts. Like, so we'll get in a room with, like, therapists who are world experts in cognitive behavioral therapy. And we'll be writing for them a training simulation that needs to feel like, for therapy students, like they're talking to a real client. And the simulations are live video, and it feels like you're talking on a Zoom conversation. So the character I'm writing has to feel real and has to, like, simulate this really complex therapy session, and specifically these things these experts want to teach. And so my job has been to sit in a room with those experts and be like, okay, talk to me how this conversation goes. And then have them lay out for me all the intricacies of how the people they talk to speak, what they sound like, what they say, how their pace changes if the conversation is going well, how their tone changes if the conversation is going poorly, if certain emotional things happen, how the client starts to sound different, and how you pick up on those things. And then my job is to mimic that, and to be that professional mimic. And it hasn't just been with therapists, right? Like, I've worked with social workers, I've worked with teachers, I've worked with physicians and, like, pediatricians, and we've worked with military people and law enforcement, and doing, like, interrogation sims, and even down to, like, grief counseling, and, like, any topic that you can think of. I've had the privilege of sitting with these world experts and learning how they do this thing. And so a lot of that is just about learning how to mimic dialogue, and coming to understand, like, hey, here's how people speak, and here's how their voices change when they modulate. When, like, there's an emotion change or a tone change in the conversation, people's voices change. Or if there's a circumstantial change, right? Like, you're going to talk differently to your best friend than you're going to talk to your physician, because there's a different power dynamic there, right? And you're going to talk differently when a cop pulls you over, because you're making weird journal pictures of an building in the middle of a pretty abandoned neighborhood in Baltimore. You're going to talk differently to that cop than you're going to talk to your best friend. And so, all that to say, like, the other half of my writing life is working as an editor to help writers capture realistic voice, because it's through our characters' voices that our readers connect with our stories, right? Like, it's through putting our characters' words in their mouths that our readers actually, like, dive into what our story is. And that's what keeps them reading all the way through the story and keeps them coming back later, is their connection with the characters. So I do that over at dialoguedoctor.com. You can find me, and actually my boss at my day job is my partner there. Her name's Laura. So Laura and I do that together. And that's a lot of fun. But yeah, that's become the other half of my writing life. And much like you do with this podcast, for me, that's about giving back. It's about like being able to, this author community that saved me and gave me some direction and hope when I really was at zero and had nothing. Kid on the way, no job, lost my health insurance, right? Like, just at zero. Had just bought a house and suddenly had no way to pay for it. All of that stuff. The writing community is where I kind of found hope and stability again. And so this is my way of giving back to that community and adding back to it. So like, hey, I have this one skill. I'm like Liam Neeson. I have a very particular set of skills. I cannot save your daughter if she gets kidnapped. What I can do is help you write better dialogue. So that's over at the dialoguedoctor.com is where I do that. That kind of work. Yeah.
That's right, folks. If your daughter's kidnapped, he's not your man.
Don't
but
call me.
Yeah.
Call Liam Neeson. Call Dom. Dom has talked to over 400 people. He will hostage negotiate your daughter home. Do not call Jeff. But if you write a scene with a hostage negotiation, Jeff can help you make it sound more realistic so that readers stay engaged.
That's right, folks.
So after your daughter's kidnapped and Dom saves them, and you write it down to put it in a book, that's when you call Jeff. Say like, hey, can you make Dom sound more realistic? And I was like, yeah, Dom's done like 400 interviews. I can totally make Dom sound more real. I was listening to a bunch. We'll mimic him and we can totally get his voice down.
Oh man, I'll be a freaking ride. It's like the good and bad thing about having your voice out there so much. Like then folks will do the whole imitation thing. It's like, yeah, it's a form of flattery.
Yeah, you're gonna have some crazy author in Baltimore walking around like me with a notepad following you around. Cops are gonna pull us over. They're gonna be like, "Do you know that guy's following you?" And I'm gonna be like, "Yeah, I'm just getting his voice down. You just gotta give me like, just get his voice down." Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm just teasing. I'm just messing around. I'm sorry, man.
It'd be funny, like, yeah, it was going good until he dropped the tree joke on people. It was great times.
Oh, yeah. Jeff has the significance of being the only interview Dom has ever hung up on. Yeah.
Oh no, that wouldn't happen. But my goodness, man. So I guess with all this wonderful knowledge and just pushing through and to be able to really just create this wonderful business for yourself and just helping other people, like, actually, funny enough, like the dialogue doctor, like, heck, how does that even work? Because that's your boss from your full-time job, and she's like, so how does that work? I guess y'all have that much of a great relationship where it's like, oh,
yeah, we're tight, man. Yeah, Laura and I are close. We actually got to know each other while we were working together at this church in the inner city. Like, I was the executive pastor, so I was like running all the programming. So, and we were doing a ton of stuff. We were doing like homeless recovery. We were running an after school program for a little while. We were running this youth mentoring program that was really great, on top of like the normal church stuff, like small groups and all that kind of stuff. And so I was running all of that, and she was the one that was kind of pioneering the youth stuff.
Oh.
We got to know each other really well. And then I had the privilege, after I had left them, I had moved on to another church. I had the privilege of being the clergy in her wedding, which was great. She got to marry her and her husband. That's always a weird thing to say. I got to marry her and her husband. I didn't actually marry them. I performed the ceremony. I got to marry her and her husband. And a wonderful cult right outside of Baltimore. It's great. 47 of us. We've all married each other. That's not true. So I got to marry, please. Oh my gosh. Dom, no one's listening anymore. So anyway, I got to perform the service for her and her husband. And it was a lot of fun. And we, and then she's the one that kind of threw me the lifeline. when I was down and out, and it's been great. Like we work well together, and we both bring different strengths to the table, which I think is always important when you're working with somebody in different projects. But yeah, and it's not weird. I would like to say like it gets weird sometimes where like she's my boss at work, and then when we like do the dialogue doctor stuff, I pretend to be in charge. But that it's actually not weird at all. We're such good friends. It's just it just flows. Yeah. So yeah,
Uh,
it's nice having long friendships like that, man. I didn't growing up, my parents moved just for my dad's career a lot. Like, I did elementary school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and a little bit in Memphis, Tennessee, and then I did and actually flipped that. I was in Memphis first, and then Ann Arbor second, and then right after junior high, I moved to New Orleans, and then after high school, moved to Texas. Right, like so, and then landed in Baltimore. So I have friendships that are long term, but nobody I've spent a ton of time with outside of my wife in the same location. And
wow.
so it's now that we've been in Baltimore for a while, it's nice to have relationships with people like Laura, where it's like, oh yeah, this is what it looks like when you're tight, when you're in a community with somebody, in a cult with 47 people. I'm not in a cult. The cult with 47 people for so many years. But yeah, for over a decade. Anyway, sorry, that's just me. I'm not in a cult. I feel the need now to say that multiple times. So
It's like, do we need to say? Do we need to give you a lifeline, Jeff? Do we need to talk you out of a hostage situation?
Somebody else. Jeff needs to call a friend. Phone a friend. I chose to phone a friend.
Like I said, it's not in the cult 3 times. All right, now the antennas are up.
That's right. Yeah, you said you've got an interview with Mark Leslie coming up. So I'm gonna phone a friend. I'm gonna call Mark Leslie in Canada. He's much better off than I am. He writes fantastic werewolf books. We'll have him come on, and Mark will say Jeff is not in the cult.
Plot twist: he's in the cult too.
That's right. That's right. And it's a werewolf cult, and all of his werewolf books, Werewolf in New York, they're all based on. They're not. If you're looking for a great werewolf book, Mark Leslie the Fave, fantastic werewolf books. But yeah, he's also not in a cult. Is that what people in a cult have to say, though? We all have to say we're not in a cult. Yes. It's not a cult.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, with being a husband of 5 kids and being able to find your place of productivity of being a night owl, like how does that really work? Like, is it like coffee that keeps you up, or is it natural energy? Like,
oh man, it's anxiety and unhealthy. No, I'm just kidding. It was for a while. So no, seriously though, like that's a deep question. Like, what is it that keeps you super productive? And I can honestly say that when I first started, my productivity, even before I was a writer, I've always been one of those people that just like works and works and works and works and works and never stops working. So part of what made me good in church life is that like what made me good at my job is that like I was on 24/7. And so like, I would get done. Well, like, so we moved to the east side of the city, and we were running our own. I was trying to run a church plant that was going to be very different than the church there. No tithe, no staff. We were living by a set of principles. We called it a neo-monastic community. So the idea was like, we're going to be like new monks. And the idea was everybody in the group had to find a place of service in the community and devote yourself to service. And then we met once a week, and we like very much like an AA group. We like read through our principles of like, here's what we stand for. And then we talked about like, so how did you do this week living out the principles? It was a wonderful time of growth and like just a beautiful season to be a part of. We all committed to do it for 5 years. It was really great. But my place of service was helping these parents build this charter school, this public charter school in the city. That was a really beautiful experience. But I just remember that time being crazy. My wife and I had 3 young kids, like 3 elementary school aged kids, 4 young kids, because my 4th one was born when we moved into that house. So 4 a baby, a toddler, a preschool kid at first, then a kindergartner, and then a first grader when we first moved there. I'm leading a church. I was working. I didn't have a at the time I wasn't working for a church. So because I'd started a church, there was like, oh, we're not going to have any staff, and not thinking about like, well, how do I get money? So this is the pastor. So I was doing temp jobs. I was working as a secretary and working in a box factory. And then, writing this blog on the side at the same time. And then it was really unhealthy because that productivity was based on a high regard of the coffee that I had started drinking with the homeless guys I was hanging out with and working with all the time. And they drank some pretty serious coffee, right? Like their coffee was like painful coffee. It wasn't like coffee. It was like, this is more sludge than coffee. So I was drinking that. I was like 3 pots a day. I was sleeping like 4 hours a night, and but what was really fueling me was a deep need to find significance in work. And it was super unhealthy. And it was, I gained a ton of weight because when you're seeking that like significance through productivity, the emotional strain of that is going to cause you to cope emotionally somehow. So, I wasn't drinking a ton back then. So for me, it was about like, okay, it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I still have work to do on this blog, and I still have notes to write for this school stuff. And the baby's crying upstairs. And so I'm just going to get some ice cream, right? Because eating that tub of ice cream is going to make me feel different than I feel right now. And like, those were my unhealthy phases of productivity. Still super productive, still like outworking everybody around me, but not in a good way. So now I'd like to say I've come to a place of health where my productivity is much healthier. So, I've learned that like my emotional stability can't be based on these measures of these mirages of success that I've set up for myself. Right. Like, so, and I call them mirages because it is like chasing a mirage in the desert. You never actually catch it. Right. Like you can see it. And so you feel like, oh, if I just run a little bit harder and a little bit faster, I'll finally catch up to this mirage of success. We're like, okay, I've made it. And the problem is it's always moving because it's not real. And even when you catch the goal you think you had, like even when I wrote my first 2 books and I was like, oh, there wasn't a parade, what's going on? It was like, oh, well, you have to do all this marketing and you have to like figure out what it means to actually sell a book. And you have to like get into these communities and figure out what the demand is. Like, what is it the readers actually want? It's like, oh, well, that's just more work. That's just more goals. That's just more things to achieve. And the mirage like moves a little bit further away. And so coming to understand that like, no, part of where I find emotional significance now is in the journey that I'm on and in the community that it brings me in contact with. So that's part of what motivates me. Part of what motivates me is like, hey, I've been given these gifts and I have the ability to do these things. I live in a time where there are no gatekeepers. I don't have to find an agent. I don't have to have a master's degree in English. I don't have to live in New York or London and be meeting the right people and have the right connections. I live in this extraordinary time where like the gates are open and I can run through them freely. And so part of the motivation is understanding like I have these gifts and I owe it to the community of people around me to use these gifts in a way that's going to benefit them and benefit my family and benefit me, right? Like centering myself on that why. And so now when I'm tired and it's like, 10 o'clock at night and I still haven't written a chapter and I'm like, I got to get my 2,000 words in, rather than like thinking about, the dream of myself and like what I want myself to be and going to get ice cream to cope with the emotional strain of that. Now I think about like, okay, what happens if I can write this book and I can move the needle a little bit further? What's the impact on my kids, right? Like if I can push another hour to create a better future for my children, am I willing to do that? Right. Like, and the healthy conversation I have now is that like, I'll be like, Or is it going to be better for my kids if I actually go to sleep right now? Because I'm going to get up at 5, right? Like I get up at 5 every morning. I'm going to walk the dog. I'm going to start making lunches for them to go to school on the days they actually go to school, because now they actually have school right behind me in the office, which is insane. And a COVID story, which we're not going to talk about. Because it's almost over. They're almost in school full time again. But all that to say, so now the decision is about like, it's not focused on my own greatness and my own dreams of my own glory, but it's focused on the why of the other people around me. Right. Like, and that's where the beautiful kind of accountability comes in, and like getting in communities of authors. So I have my own community, the Dialogue Doctor Slack group. That's fantastic. It's really small. There's about 15 of us in there right now. It's a fantastic community. They keep me focused and going, because I know like, okay, we're on this journey together, and I have a responsibility to this community to do my part as part of this community. But I'm also part of a community called the Author Success Mastermind Group, which is run by Jay Thorne. Jay had a huge impact on me and helping me like launch the Dialogue Doctor and really get over some of my own personal insecurities to come to a place where I can help others. Because I think when you start trying to help others, the first question we all get plagued with is like, well, who am I to do this thing? Or like, who am I to do this? And I think for me, I wouldn't recommend this necessarily for anybody else, but for me, it's like, well, you're really not anybody special. You just have had these experiences that other people can benefit from. For me, that really helped. So anyway, all that to say, used to be productivity was fueled by a desire for personal greatness that was the emotional strain of never achieving that greatness, and this was mitigated with ice cream, usually at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, productivity is driven by understanding my why, understanding why I move forward. And the emotional strain of it is mitigated by being in community with other people that have similar whys, that are moving in the same direction. Right. Like, so that's my long story to answer. Like, how do you stay productive? For me, it's been about a journey of emotional health and trying to find a place of emotional health so that I don't have a heart attack by the time I'm 50, which is when I was 30. I was in the middle of a tough job, and I was so stressed out. I had people coming at me all the time about they're just expressing their emotional frustrations around change. And I wasn't old enough and mature enough yet to understand that that wasn't personal. And so I was driving home from work, and I just started having this like pain in my chest. And I remember I went to the emergency room, and I was sitting there, and the emergency room nurse was like triaging me. And she's like, okay, you're not having a heart attack. She's like, you're having a panic attack. And this beautiful nurse was like, talk to me about what's going on. Beautiful, because she actually spent the like next 10 minutes to like actually talk me through it. And I was like, well, I'm stressed, and kids and life and productivity, and I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this. And she's like, if you don't figure out some other way to deal with this emotional strain, you're going to have a heart attack by the time you're 50. She's like, you've got to figure out a better way to deal with this. And that conversation with that nurse that was a complete stranger to me really helped set me on this path of like, okay, how do I keep this productivity that I love, that allows me to put things in the world and not sacrifice my physical, mental, and emotional health to it, and not drive my family insane? Because when I was unhealthy, I was driving everyone around me crazy. I couldn't see it, because I was always chasing the mirage so fast, but I was driving everybody nuts. The people I worked with were like exhausted by me all the time. That's something people used to say to me all the time. They're like, man, you're like a tornado. You make us all tired. And I used to wear that as a badge of honor. And finally because I was like, yeah, I'm a tornado. I get crap done. And finally I had stopped, and I was like, wait, nobody wants to be around a tornado.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that. They were telling me they don't like it, and I was taking it as like, because I was so emotionally unhealthy, I was like, yeah, it's great. I'm gonna blow through this thing. And it's like, oh, this isn't good, man. So yeah, all that to say, like, I sorry for the long answer, but I feel like if we're gonna talk about productivity as an author. It's important to talk about, figuring out your why and building your community around you so that you can do this thing that is emotionally painful, right? Like writing is emotionally painful because, you are bleeding on the page, which is that famous saying of like, how do you write a book? You open up a vein and bleed on the page. That is what writing is in a lot of ways. You're taking this emotional journey with these characters and you feel like you're just pouring yourself into it, especially after you publish it, and you publish it in a world of silence because there are no gatekeepers, which means everybody's storming through the gates. So there's a books a year, because we're all in this place where like we can just do whatever we want. There's no, the the guards have left the asylum, and all of us crazies with our journals walking around town. I brought it back. See, I brought it back. All with our journals walking around are just putting anything in the world we want, which is great, but it just means there's not enough readers for. I mean, there are. That's actually a fallacy. There's enough readers for everybody, but it feels like if you're not doing the work to be seen, it'll feel like there's nobody out there to watch, and that is emotionally painful, and it's hard to sustain. So finding this place of emotional health where you can maintain your productivity and care for yourself at the same time so that you're capable of producing the best art you can produce is super important, and I'm a little passionate about it, so I'll rant about it all day.
Yes indeed, yes indeed, yes indeed. My man's dropping so much heat because it's so darn true. Like, don't really chase those mirages of success because it's so true. Like, that's really what social media has done, in addition to everything else, is given folks another way to chase that mirage of success, where folks have these curated feeds out there, stuff that they want you to see, and folks think, oh, you're living your best life. I'm not going to like your post or anything. I'm just going to cyber stalk you and assume you're freaking fabulous. Yeah. When in reality, it's like, hey, they may be struggling from day to day just to keep the lights on in the house, and they may, like, just like COVID, like, it took away a lot of things from a lot of people, and folks have been forced to pivot, and some of them are still recovering from last year's onslaught, and heck, even before the pandemic even started, they were still probably struggling. So it's so true. Like, don't really go after that mirage of success. Really know what your true, genuine why is, and tap into that, and never forget it.
Yeah, and I think the problem for me with social media was that I didn't need it to create the mirage, right? Like I had enough in me to create my own mirage, right? Like, and part of that is I grew up, my father was a super famous surgeon. So part of that was like living up to that. He was a super famous surgeon who died early. So part of that was like living up to the legacy that he left behind. So I didn't need social media to create my mirage, but what social media did for me is justified the mirage I was creating, right? Like, it allowed me to be like, see, I should be succeeding in this way because I can go to the 20 books to 50K Facebook page and I can see all these people who are selling way more than I am, and not taking into account, like, they're doing different work than I'm doing. They have different lives and challenges than I have, right? Like they, and like you said, I'm seeing a snapshot of celebration, not the full picture, not to denigrate or tear those people down, but just to say that, like, hey, what we're viewing is not a biography, right? Like, what we're viewing in so many ways is a highlight reel. And like, coming to understand that, like, using that highlight reel to justify my own unhealth is a death spiral, right? Like, it just makes it worse and worse and worse until finally you burn out and quit. And to quote Seth Godin, the difference between someone who is successful and someone who's not is persistence. Because if you just keep hitting the nail with the hammer, at some point it's gonna go into the wood. You'll figure it out. You just got to keep banging on it. Yeah.
And that wood will end up on the lawn, maybe.
That's right. That's right. Just like the Woodlawn Baltimore neighborhood. Yeah. Get that good where they put all the wood out on the lawn.
That's right, all the wood, baby. Mahogany, right. All the wood.
All the wood.
Oh, man. Before we go even further down another rabbit hole, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you're to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but this time in 2021 with all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I've listened to a bunch of your interviews and I was like, what would I tell my 25-year-old self? And I think I would just tell him to relax and enjoy it. Because my 25-year-old self was so consumed with making a mark in the world. And I think I'm going to go down another rabbit hole. You can't stop me. You can.
Hop in it, man.
That's right. So I just took my kid to college. My 17-year-old's viewing colleges, and I didn't take him to college. We were viewing colleges, and we went to my alma mater to go see it. He wanted to see it. He hasn't been able to see it because of COVID. And we went, and while I was there, I met up at a bar with some old college friends that I haven't seen since I was in my early 20s. And we started talking about old times, and they were describing this kid that was describing me, that was obsessed with saving the world and was obsessed with every encounter having this like mission to it. And realizing as I was sitting there across from them, like, man, I missed so much connection with these two amazing guys because I was so obsessed with my own mission and my own deep need to find purpose and significance. And, part of me would just want to grab that 20-year-old kid and be like, hey, just enjoy the people around you. Right. Like, because that's where the true, like, greatness in life is found, in the connections with other humans around us. It's just like, just stop. And because I can honestly say, like, for as hard as I worked and for as much as I pursued that significance, I can trace all the great things in life that I've experienced and I have back to my connection and relationship with other people. Right. And I can trace all of the tragedy and nonsense of life that I created back to my own selfish ambition and vain conceit. Right. Like, if I go through my life and I'm like, here are the real pains and the real problems, I'm like, oh yeah, that has some ambition some selfish ambition at the back of it. I'm like, oh, but these things work really well. I'm like, yeah, that's because when I was connecting with other people and focused on loving, caring for, serving other people. That's what I would tell my 25-year-old self, to calm down, chill out, and just enjoy the people you're around. Because life would have been fuller if I had been less full of myself. Yeah.
Wow. Life would have been fuller if I was less full of myself. Man. Yes, indeed. A lot of one-liners in this one. Man, I'm going to be mining, baby. Gotta have my freaking construction hat on with this one. That's what I'm talking about.
Don't look too close, because the diamonds may come out to actually just be unrefined coal. So don't look too close. Admire them from afar.
Yep, my man's probably gonna have like 5 quote cards when this episode comes out. It's gonna be fabulous with a capital F. In this case, a capital B, baby. Be more.
That's right. That's right, man. Oh. Yeah.
Well, for those who want to be more bookish and pick up all copies of your wonderful book, heck, maybe even join you in this wonderful writing journey, which is the first ever heard of, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you and keep up with what you're doing, my man?
So you can find me at jeffelkinswriter.com, JFFELKINS writer.com, or dialoguedoctor.com if you're a writer and you want to get plugged into like dialogue stuff. I do a weekly podcast called The Dialogue Doctor, where every other week is a session, an editing session in which I'm working with an author on their work. And then the off weeks, I'm either doing Q&As with people, or I'm just pulling the community together to, like, a lot of times we'll take a movie and we'll break down character voices in the movie. So we just have a good time. So if you're a writer, come find me at dialoguedoctor.com. If you're a reader and you're interested in reading Baltimore-based books, come find me at jeffelkinswriter.com. Both of those have newsletters, and if you sign up for the newsletter, you both get a free book. So jeffelkinswriter.com, you get my novel, The 12 Commandments, for free if you sign up for my weekly newsletter, and monthly newsletter. And then dialoguedoctor.com, I write a weekly newsletter that goes along with the podcast, and you get a book about things you can start doing right now to fix your dialogue. So that's the best place to find me, are those two sites. And I respond to email quick. So if you have a question, something we talked about, you want to connect about something, go to the website, hit me up, and usually within 48 hours I can respond.
Woohoo! Well, there you have it, folks. Father was a doctor, and this man's a doctor too, baby, but of dialogue. So
that's right.
He's gonna fix your dialogue, baby. That's
only
right.
A doctor in my mind. Yeah.
Don't worry. And those who are tuning into that wonderful podcast every other week and subscribing to that weekly newsletter about the good old dialogue. Yes, indeed. So check it out, like 99 Library Books, and keep up with all that he's doing, baby. I'm telling you, my man's doing some great work. He's on fire, and he's burning hot, baby. He's burning hot. So any closing thoughts before we close up shop, Jeff?
No, just thanks for letting me come on, man. It was fun. Thanks for letting me rant. I appreciate it. Yeah, and you're great. I love the show. I keep listening. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Everybody knows that the best listeners listen to this part of the interview when it's all over. To solidify your status as a champion, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave a great 5-star review on iTunes, and share with someone that you care about and that would enjoy this content too. Keep being a fabulous, super special, awesome human for making it this far, and I hope you enjoy the next episode just as much.